Hey guys, I'm back once again. I hope you guys enjoyed the last video about the point tempo. I thought I could kind of continue in on this series. I had a bunch of ideas for what I wanted to do for the second episode of this, and I thought continuing on with vocabulary from like other TCG games would be a helpful place to start, just to make sure that everyone's on the same starting point. And these terms get thrown around a lot, and it's difficult to kind of pin them down. Value versus tempo. Value is something that is pretty self-explanatory, but like tempo is actually a pretty it's a pretty arbitrary term, and it gets thrown around a lot, and people don't really know what it means and aren't really able to articulate what it means. So I'm going to do my best in this video to try to articulate these topics to you, because these topics are not topics that people are actually able to articulate all that well. Value is really easy, tempo is not so easy, and especially tempo in the context of Riftbound is a little bit different from tempo in the context of other card games. So I'll do my best. Make sure you guys subscribe for me and let me know what other topics you guys want to see. I got a bunch of topics lined up and not a lot of time, because I do work full time and that's why I don't do coaching. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoy. So let's talk a little bit about value and tempo. All right, so what is value and tempo? So value is positioning yourself better for future turns by investing your current energy into producing value, essentially. So what does producing value mean? Producing value means drawing cards, generating runes or other resources being something like gold, or, well, it's mostly just gold, to be honest, and then setting up pieces that will affect future game states. So think of things like Zhonya's, like a lot of gear are like this. So Heart of Dark Ice, Mask of Foresight, Zhonya's Hourglass, a ton of these gear pieces or units that help you in the future that are like not that good. Things like Stellacorn Herder, Lux Crown Guard, applied researchers. You'll see a little bit more of that in the future slides, so don't worry if you don't know what those cards are. But that's generally how value works in this game and in most other games as well, is number one, drawing cards, number two, generating resources that are not cards, and number three, setting yourself up for future turns. What is tempo? So tempo, in my best articulation of tempo as a concept, is advancing and pressuring the existing game state on the board itself. So this means scoring points, generating might, and generating bodies, and then stopping your opponent from scoring points. Effectively, tempo is similar to the way we were talking about point tempo in the previous game. Tempo, as a more general concept, is the speed of the game. That's kind of where the tempo term comes from, is talking about speed. So if we're talking about value versus tempo, tempo kind of emphasizes the speed at which the game is completed. And so the faster you score points, the faster you put dudes onto the battlefield and threaten to score points, and the sooner you can stop your opponent from winning the game, is the way that you basically grab a hold of the game's tempo from the start of the game. So what are some general heuristics that we can use to categorize value and tempo? So value and tempo is not like a perfect dichotomy. Like, it's not like one end of the spectrum is value and one end of the spectrum is tempo. But I think as a starting point, it's a pretty reasonable heuristic to have. So cards that generate value are low tempo. Cards that have high tempo have a low value proposition. I don't want to say like they're low value, because there is a lot of like value in having high tempo plays, but like a long-term value proposition of these high tempo cards is like not really there. So I have two examples kind of on the bottom of the screen. I have Pack of Wonders Treasure Trove, and I have Sprites. So Pack of Wonders Treasure Trove is you're spending 2 cards and 4 energy in order to draw 1 card and generate 1 rune. So this is an extremely slow strategy that you need to do like 3 times before it actually has a net positive effect for you. The thing is, this is an engine. Like, it keeps going, it's infinite. As long as you have energy to invest in this, it generates effectively infinite value for you. As opposed to something like a Sprite. Sprites are the perfect emphasis for what a high tempo play would be, which is it comes in ready, it is high might, it's able to score right away, and it dies immediately the following turn. Which means this Sprite does not stay on the board, and its entire goal is to control the existing game state on this turn and this turn only, essentially. All right, so control decks on one side of the spectrum is control decks rely on high value, low tempo game plans. High value, low tempo. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have aggressive decks that rely on low value, high tempo game plans. The reason these are low value is because typically aggressive decks are willing to throw away value or throw away cards in order to gain tempo. They sacrifice cards to gain tempo or put pressure on the existing game state. So you might ask yourself, okay, value versus tempo, which is better? Which should I care about as a player? And the answer is every single deck has some kind of balance between value and tempo, and having an emphasis in either does not inherently advantage or disadvantage your deck. You can't say, this deck is a value deck, therefore it is good. And you can't say, this deck is a tempo deck, and therefore it is good. There are good decks that have a super high focus on value, and there are good decks that have a good focus on tempo. And what there also are bad decks that have emphasis on these as well, right? So there are going to be bad value decks and bad tempo decks. And the strength of a deck is not determined by what emphasis the game plan has on value or tempo. The value of, or like the strength of a deck is determined by how well it's able to execute the game plan, essentially. So what that means for you is you are allowed to play the deck that suits you the most. As it currently exists in Riftbound, there are good decks for every playstyle. Any playstyle on like the value tempo axis is viable and at least like tier 2. You can like reasonably find a tier 2 deck for any reasonable playstyle that you're looking for, which is fantastic. And that's what I really, really like, which means it is kind of up to you to experiment, figure out what kind of playstyles suit you the most, and just pick something that works for you, which is great. You're not like forced into any particular archetype. So what am I kind of talking about between the balance between value and tempo and good decks for any of them? So this is kind of an example. This is some weird graph that I've made, and kind of leaning towards the left side of the screen, we have value, and then leaning towards the right side of the screen here, we have tempo. So let me just turn my video capture off for a second. So we have tempo on the right side. So this is like some weird visual representation, which is essentially we have like some decks that are like 100% value and 0% tempo, and then you look at decks that are like 70% value and 30% tempo. And obviously like numerically categorizing these strategies by like, oh, 70% tempo, like this is not like nonsensical, right? It's not like a real thing, but hopefully this just kind of helps to demonstrate how different decks kind of put emphasis onto value or tempo differently. So we look at value style decks. These are like Pack of Wonders decks, and then Aurora decks are usually like very, very, very high emphasis on value generation. And then Irelia is an example of a very good deck that has a high emphasis on value, but is still like decently geared towards being able to play reasonably fast as well, because of things like Stellacorn Herder being able to generate a lot of value, and then Irelia Fervent being able to translate a lot of this value into a threatening board state. And then we look at something like Rengar, which is a little bit more towards the tempo side, a little bit less so towards the value side, but even Rengar decks are able to draw a pretty decent amount of cards and generate a good amount of value and put a lot of guys on the board. So even though he's able to pressure the game state very, very well, he is able to still generate value and hold battlefields. Then if we go all the way to the right side, we have Rek'Sai and Lilia. These are examples of decks that are extremely, extremely high emphasis on tempo, basically zero value. What they just do is throw units away. Any unit that is on the battlefield for Lilia or Rek'Sai are effectively dead. Rek'Sai's units are very, very small, and Lilia's units are already dead. They're already temporary. So this is kind of a spectrum of how decks can operate in Riftbound, how you can categorize decks. A lot of decks have difficulty falling along this axis, but when you're kind of deciding decks, you can kind of look at what kind of styles of decks you prefer going into, and then you can look within those categories. There are tier 1 decks that are great for basically any playstyle. So why do I say that you can be a tier, like you can have whatever emphasis you want and you can get good decks and bad decks, is basically other decks are able to have emphasis on value and tempo as well, but they just operate at a lower power level. The power level is just lower on these decks because they don't execute the game plan as well as you maybe wish they did, right? So Volibear is like super high value. He does end up playing Aurora and just bunch of big dudes, but they just suck. They just don't do anything. Akali generates a ton of value. She plays like Irelia, but she plays like bad Irelia, you know? And all these decks, you can find very reasonable parallels between these decks and the good decks. The problem is these decks just don't execute the game plan as well as the better decks. So when you are selecting a deck, you actually don't have to worry about your playstyle being good or not. You just need to worry about finding a deck that suits your playstyle and is also good if you want to like be competitive at this game, right? Which, if you're watching this video, I assume that you do. All right, so let's go into a little bit more depth onto value and tempo as concepts in this game specifically, right? So first, we'll talk about value in terms of card advantage. Card advantage is like a very, very common TCG vocabulary thing you'll hear all the time. Card advantage. What is card advantage? So usually someone will say like minus X card advantage or plus X card advantage. Like this card's a -1, this card's a +1. What do we mean when we have this plus or minus number flying around? We don't know what it means, right? So the way that value decks will operate is they will have an emphasis on being able to have plus X card advantage cards. So what constitutes a card, right? So permanence on board, so permanence being units or permanence being gear, and non-temporary gears and stuff, permanence on board and cards in hand. These are what constitutes a card in card games, generally speaking. Cards in hand essentially means like cards you have access to. So if you think about like flow cards in your bin or like other ways to recur stuff, like that's kind of card advantage as well. But you know, from a more broad standpoint, it's permanence on board and cards you have access to be able to use, essentially, right? So when you have a card like Dredge Up, which is 2 mana, draw 1, this is a +0 in card advantage. +0 in card advantage. You are spending a card to draw a card. Okay. Now what happens when we flow Dredge Up? When we flow Dredge Up, we are spending 0 cards and we are drawing another card. So Dredge Up, when flowed, is a +1 in card advantage, but Dredge Up without flow is a +0 in card advantage. When you are playing a unit, it is a neutral card advantage. If we take an example like Lecturing Yordle, which I don't have pulled up, when we have a card like Lecturing Yordle, which I just added to this presentation, this guy is a +1 in card advantage. He draws you a card, just like Dredge Up, but he is a body on board. This is what's important. He's a +1 because he's able to go onto the board and replace himself. This is why cards that replace themselves, especially units that replace themselves, are very, very valuable because he's a +1 inherently by existing. Bewitching Spirit, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, is the same thing, but your opponent discards a card, right? So this is also a +1 because you spend 1 card, generate 1 body on board, so it's 1 for 1, and your opponent loses a card. So that's a -1 from them, which is a +1 for you, essentially, right? So this is how card advantage works. You spend cards, and then you get a certain result, right? So if you spend a spell and it kills one thing that your opponent has, it's a neutral exchange. You lose a card, they lose a card. It's a +0 card advantage. If you're able to spend 1 card and draw 4 cards like Progress Day, this is a +3 in card advantage. And this is really the way card advantage works in trading card games. So what other value pieces are there beyond just drawing cards? You know, card advantage is not the only thing in Riftbound. There is things like rune advantage, ramping, so things like Catalyst of Eons or Treasure Trove that we showed before. These guys give you access to more runes. So you're going to spend energy now to have more energy in the future, right? So Catalyst costs 4, so you're spending 4, and next turn you're going to have 6. So you have, in these 2-turn span, you have access to 10 energy, right? 4 on the Catalyst turn and 6 if you didn't play Catalyst, right? So you would have had access to 10 runes. If you play Catalyst, you're spending the 4, and then next turn you have access to 8. So it's like 12 mana, but you spend 4 of it towards using Catalyst. But what it means is every future turn after Catalyst, you're able to spend more and more runes. And so if you think about something like Treasure Trove, Pack Trove is a very, very energy intensive engine that requires a lot of energy investment in order to generate value. So something like Catalyst is able to fuel an engine like that if you want to generate infinite energy, right? So ramping is an example of rune advantage. Ramping is a term that comes from Magic. Don't worry about its origins. Basically what that means is just generating more runes. All right, what other value pieces are there? There are permanents that discount future cards. So Applied Researchers is a card that I've talked about this video already, and I've talked about in previous videos. Applied Researchers is a card that discounts your future spells, but she costs 7. She costs 7 to play. She costs 4 energy to play her and 3 energy to empower her. She costs a ton of energy to play, but what she allows you to do is all your future spells. Imagine all the future spells you can play. Applied Researchers, if Lux is allowed to start her turn with an Applied Researchers on the board, you lose the game. You lose the game on the spot because Applied Researchers is so, provides so much value for Lux, right? And lastly, permanents that provide value in future turns, right? Or provide board presence in future turns. So things like Rage Amplifier, right, pictured here, or Mask of Foresight, or Zonya's Hourglass, just permanents that don't do anything the turn that they hit the board, or do very little the turn they hit the board, but provide a promise for the future to be able to provide value for you, assuming they don't get removed. So this is kind of the way value decks operate, especially in Riftbound. So how does value win the game? All right, so there's a few ways to win the game through value. You can win through card advantage. So a lot of cards can translate into positive card trades. So for example, we have Singularity. Singularity deals 6 damage up to 2 units. You could spend 1 card to kill 2 cards. We're +1 in card advantage. This is what it means to win through card advantage, and what it means to win through positive card trades. Eventually, your opponent runs out of cards because your cards are worth more than their cards. If you're falling starring 2 units, and then you're falling starring 2 units, and then you're singularitying 2 units, you've spent 3 cards, and they've lost 6 units, right? So Singularity or other positive card trades are very, very advantageous for you, and they're usually very expensive as well. And that's how value is able to kind of come back into the game after dumping a lot of their energy towards generating value. The second way is to win through attrition. So what attrition means is basically running your opponent out of steam and just outlasting them. Through in Riftbound, you only need to have 1 guy on the board, and then that guy can solo win the game if your opponent's not allowed to do anything. And so the way that Pack Ezreal wins, which is a very, very strong value deck, is he just makes you discard your entire hand and then sits on the board and scores points, and you can't do anything because there aren't 1 card combos that are allowed to basically break over Ezreal's boards. And then the third way that they win is winning through overwhelming value. Overwhelming value. You have cards that generate so much value and are able to cheat out so much resources that they just win. Hit the first Elder Dragon, sure. Oh my god, the second Elder Dragon has hit the towers. Anytime you're getting so much value out of these, a second Elder Dragon is 24 energy you've been able to cheat into play. Third Elder Dragon is 36 energy that you've been able to cheat into play from 1 card spent. This is what it means to win through overwhelming value, and that's the way Aurora wins. All right. So with that being said, how does value lose? I made it sound like value is so good, right? Value is so good. So how does value lose? Value loses by just dying, all right? So sometimes they just lose very, very quickly. There's a lot of ways for your opponent to just score really, really quickly. Thrill of the Hunt, Ride the Winds, Triforce, Green Ari, Baron Nashor, all these score extra points. So sometimes value loses by just dying before they stabilize and able to get over the hump, right? So anytime you lose to some bullshit value engine, you just say, man, could I have just killed this guy? Can I just, well, not in game, but you need to be aggressive to score points in order to stop these value engines from actually being able to take over the game. All right. Another way value loses is they lose the permanents that generate value before they're able to actually cash in the value, right? So if we look at a card like Applied Researchers, it hits the board, you pay 7 energy to empower it, and then your opponent just kills it on their turn, right? Then you've just spent 7 energy to do nothing, basically. Or say you played Pack of Wonders, Treasure Trove, the list, and your opponent plays Thermo Beam and removes all of it. Then you get what? 1 Treasure Trove trigger, and you probably lose the game because you lost 2 Pack of Wonders, right? So another way value loses is they get their engine interrupted, and the permanents that generate value are removed before they're able to fully cash in their value. Another way value loses is they get their big spell enablers interrupted. Big spell enablers being something like Progress Day or Singularity or Time Warp. These enablers that give very, very high rewards for being able to play them, not necessarily in terms of the the board state itself, but in terms of card advantage. So if you're able to like abandon a progress state or something, your opponent spends 6 and a power to do nothing. And then the last way that value loses is their big payoffs get interrupted. So something like getting your Elder Dragon Star-Crossed is a way that you lose, or, you know, getting the Time Warp windwalled or abandoned or something like that, or like the Bellows Breath that's going to kill 6 units gets defied or something like that, right? So the big payoffs can get interrupted as well, and that's how value loses as well. So that's enough about value. Let's talk about tempo a little bit. All right, so tempo. Well, let's talk about tempo in terms of like the TCG vocabulary. One thing that was pointed out to me in the previous video, and I thought is important to emphasize, is tempo is not efficiency. Tempo is not efficiency. How can you call it efficiency when value is so efficient? The goal of card games and the reason decks are strong is because they are very efficient. You can efficiently generate value, you can efficiently generate might on the board. So tempo is not efficiency. Tempo is about pressure. Tempo is about speed and pressure. That's essentially what tempo is, right? So if we look at this from a card advantage perspective, where value takes a lot of plus X card advantage, tempo takes a lot of minus X card advantage, right? So tempo trades resources, so things like cards or runes, for an advantageous board state. Gust is like you're spending an entire card and you just delay their early turn, right? You're not even removing this card. The card's coming back probably the same turn even that you gusted, but you're stopping your opponent from scoring a point. You're stopping your opponent from being able to develop a hold on that battlefield that they walk into, right? Or you're forcing, you know, cards from their hand as well to answer this or stuff like that, right? So tempo trades resources. So in Gust's case, it's a card in hand, but they also can trade runes, right? So Star-Crossed, Fizz Star-Crossed, also, so Star-Crossed, you like use the card in your hand and you lose the card on the board, and in order to bounce their units to their hand, right? So that's like a plus, like bouncing the unit is like a +0 because the unit is still in their hand. They still have access to it, right? You're losing a card in your hand, so that's 1, and you're losing a unit on board, so that's 2, right? So Star-Crossed is a -2. Star-Crossed inherently is a -2 in terms of card advantage. If you're playing Fizz, you are recycling a rune from your recycling a card from your trash, which is like a 0 because you're not really using that card because you already used it, and the Fizz is going back to your hand, so it's like a 0, and then it's like also a 0 for your opponent, but it spends 2 runes, like 3 energy and 2 runes to be able to do that, right? So Star-Crossed inherently itself is a -2, but Fizz Star-Crossed is a +0, but it's a -2 in runes. So even though like it's really, really broken, if you view it in terms of what tempo is trading in order to do these broken things, it like kind of almost looks reasonable. Yeah, so another kind of vocabulary, this one is like not as like solidified in the TCG player like vocabulary because it's not super relevant in something like Magic, but like board state. This is kind of something I'm talking about myself, but I did mention it in the previous slide. But it has similar principles to card advantage, especially in Riftbound, right? So board state can fundamentally be boiled down to the threats that you have on the board, which is like the amount of might that you have on board and the number of bodies that you have on board. The reason number of bodies is important in a game like Riftbound is because bodies are able to score points. It doesn't matter how large the bodies are, they're allowed to score points. If we look at a game like Magic, which has life totals, the larger the unit is, the faster in which the game ends. With Magic, you have 20 life, and a 1 attack unit is going to end the game in 20 turns, right? But a 10 attack unit is going to be able to end the game in 2 turns, right? So in those types of games, the amount of might is more valuable, but in Riftbound, the number of bodies is actually very valuable as well. A 1 might unit is able to walk onto a board and end the game in 8 turns. A 10 might unit is able to walk onto the board and then end the game in also 8 turns, right? So number of bodies is like weirdly valuable in Riftbound in comparison to a lot of other games. And then board state is also pressure for getting points. So units on board plus units in base equates to a lot of pressure because you're able to, like, you've already gotten the points for the turn because you have units on the battlefield. I meant units on battlefield instead of units on board, but you have units on the battlefields and then you have units in the base to be able to conquer for the following turn as well. So this is what tempo is, and this is what it means to have a very advantageous board state, is you have units in base to threaten future conquers, and you've already cashed in units on the battlefields for points this turn as well. All right, so how does tempo win? So tempo wins through pressure. Tempo wins through pressure. You pressure the game state. You try to put pressure on your opponents so that you win the game before they're able to stabilize. So you can win through battlefield control. You take engagements on favorable turns that prevent your opponent from enacting their game plan. Things like Void Assault or Irresistible Feyfolk. Irresistible Feyfolk up here has been terrorizing meta. This guy is broken, and what he allows you to do is he allows you to take engagements on favorable terms, and that's why he's so good, so good. The second way to win is you win through developing threats like Darius and delaying threats like Abandon. You don't have to prevent threats, you don't need to counterspell them, you just need to delay threats. So this is why purple is such a strong tempo color, because Abandon delays threats, Star-Crossed and Gust delay threats. It's not about stopping threats. It's about stopping them for 1 turn. Stop them from 2 turns. That's all you need. That's all you need in Riftbound, because the game ends in like 6 turns, right? So if you're able to delay them for 2 turns, then that's a third of the game, basically, if you're able to delay threats, right? And then the last way is just winning through positive combat trades on board. It doesn't have to actually be explicitly through combat, but like showdowns. So this is why Punch First is a really great card. It's like you only have to hold up 1 energy and it results in 5 might, which is a very large number. So this is also the way that tempo wins. So how does tempo lose? Okay. So tempo loses by ending a turn or exchange with a losing board state. There's a lot of ways to end up with a losing board state. Watcher Bellows is a great way to end up with a losing board state. You can lose like 8 units or like 10 units from Watcher Bellows, right? Like you could reasonably lose 8 units with Watcher Bellows because you can accelerate Watcher, walk onto a board, kill a unit, walk your other units onto the other battlefield, kill those units, and then repeat Bellows on the backline to kill 6 more units. This is why Watcher Bellows is very strong, and any value blue deck always runs Watcher Bellows. You're spending 2 cards and you can kill up to 8+ cards. Very strong. This is how tempo loses. You end a turn or an exchange with a losing board state. Another example is you try to go onto a battlefield and you punch first, and then your unit gets rebuked or gets star-crossed. And now you've spent a bunch of runes, you've spent a bunch of energy, you've spent your unit on board, you spent a card in hand, and you got nothing from it. This is how you end an exchange with a losing board state. Another example of a losing board state is you have units on the battlefield and no units on base. And then your units on the battlefield get removed on the following turn because they're likely to, and then you have a losing board state. Another example of the way tempo loses is just not being able to recover from being behind in point tempo. This happens a lot in tempo versus tempo matchups. This is why tempo versus tempo matchups are very die rolly. The person who goes first tends to win in these matchups because it's very difficult to recover from being in a point tempo deficit. If your opponent goes first, and they're threatening to win the game 1 turn earlier than you, then you're forced to hold, and tempo decks are built to be able to break holds. So this is why tempo versus tempo matchups are very swingy, very tie roll dependent, and this is how tempo loses. You're just not able to recover from being behind in point tempo from the very start of the game. Another way to lose is you just run out of threats. You only have so many cards in your hands that are threatening. So we think about something like Punch First or like Darius. Like these cards are very threatening, but you need to have other cards in your deck that are going to be less threatening, and eventually you run out of cards. If you get them discarded, or you just like take a very bad exchange, they get like sabotaged away or something like that, right? There is a world where you run out of threats, and the remaining cards that you may or may not own are just not threatening enough to actually be able to seal out the game, right? So another way tempo loses, you just run out of threats. And then the last way that tempo realistic loses is getting outvalued by these huge value engines, or like mana cheating, right? So I'm looking at you, Dazzling Aurora. So if an Elder Dragon enters the board and shoots 3 units, and then the Elder walks on, and then like Bellows Breath kills your entire backline, you just lose the game, right? Like the Aurora player after 2 turns has been able to cheat out 24 energy worth of units. And there's a good chance that by that point, you haven't even been able to spend 24 energy in total. And these guys have played 9 energy gear, 12 energy unit, 12 energy unit. You're looking at 33 energy worth of spend, and you haven't even been able to reach like 25 or something, right? At that, right? And then like Dazzling Aurora threatens to continue generating these units as well, right? So this is another way that tempo loses is they're just not able to close out the game fast enough, and then these value engines and mana cheating just break the game and you're just not allowed to play. But yeah, so rant over. This hopefully is a decent gives you a decent understanding of the way that value and tempo interacts, like specifically in Riftbound. Tempo is like a really nebulous, arbitrary term that gets thrown out a lot. So hopefully this helps people understand what it means to actually have a high tempo play, or like a low tempo play, or a tempo deck, or a value deck or something, right? Like, these terms are so nebulous. So hopefully me articulating this helps with understanding the way the game works and helps with your deck building and your gameplay and stuff like that. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching and learned something. I will try to continue putting out videos at this pace, hopefully. I'm mostly just trying to cash in on the YouTube algorithm, pushing my channel to do well. I will do my best. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Let me know if you guys have any other topics you'd like me to cover. But yeah, like and subscribe. Thanks.